An exceptionally good morning to all of you, and thank you for joining us this morning. We are pleased to have everyone here with us. I'm Anton Thayalan, the Chief Evangelist for Luminary Learning Solutions, and I will be the voice of the webinar this morning. Welcome everyone to the new and improved Season 3 of Reset and Go. First launched back in 20th of April 2020, in the thick of the pandemic, taking on a full life of its own, Reset and Go now continues past the reboarding and settling into what we now call the new normal, thanks to the vocabulary COVID has brought along with. So here we go in continuation to Saturdays are for Learning with Luminary, under the theme Revive and Thrive. Over the next 10 weeks, we will be examining 10 topics of interest, all contributing to thriving in your respective areas, not only to regain, but also to double the momentum. As the saying goes, ladies and gentlemen, gear up to get your learning on. In today's segment of Revive and Thrive, we're discussing the topic, Lessons from the Pandemic, an organizational dynamic and way forward. A conversational exchange of real experiences and validated ideas on which to leverage your success and truly thrive. Facilitating the conversation this morning is Ashik Aminuddin, who's a trainer with Luminary Learning Solutions. And it is my pleasure to welcome our subject matter experts this morning. On the panel, we have Sanjeev Palyavardhana, Chief Operating Officer for Mitra Digital Services, Mitra Innovations. Joining him is Mahesh Amarasiri, GM Corporate Planning and Business Development, DSI Samsung Group. Without further ado, handing over the reins to Ashik. Over to you, sir.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen listening in, and thank you, Anton, for that introduction. It was very crisp and nice. And welcome both our panelists on board this morning. It's a beautiful morning, and I'm happy to have Sanjeev Palyavardhana and Mahesh Amarasiri. They've been introduced to you already. So, friends, today, as Anton just mentioned, the topic is about organizational dynamics and the way forward. So, just want to explain the context topic. So, to start off, all of us know that we are past the pandemic. It's still moving out there, but Sri Lanka is somewhat okay. Now we find ourselves shake up period where things are make a little sense. There is more structure to what we expect, and most importantly, we've accepted this changing volatile environment to navigate through this. We all witnessed the past few months unfold shocking revelations and tensions of what were safe havens, safe bets, good advice or practice, and who we thought to be reliable, and everything has actually turned upside down. So what we want to take home, or the outcomes of this morning, would generally be around tips on how to inculcate new best practices or more focus on existing practices in developing people, the people perspective, how to manage finances and partnerships as we move on, and how organizations should respond, and how you actually should model your business, and has this changed, and should we change the way we look at our business taking it forward. So I'd like to start this morning with Sanjeev. You could take the first off the bat. So let's begin. So how were people best managed during the crisis and after is the first question. And what were the best practices that emerged that will last in the future? So I would like to start off with that because it gives a good indication of what we've gone through and what we learned and how did people react, and out of the things that people did, what actually succeeded. So Sanjeev, I'd like to hear from you, and then move on to Mahesh for his comments as well.
So first of all, good morning, Ashik, and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. Yes, so when it comes to people matters, I think the first and most important thing is enablement. When a situation like this arises, are people properly enabled to handle this? We've been talking about business continuity planning for years and years, but I think most corporates were thoroughly tested when it comes to BCP during the pandemic. And if
Sajid, lost you? You make sure you're on mute. Yes, go on. So I think we'll move on to Mahesh until we have Sanjeev. Mahesh, could you lay on this, shed some light on this question, please?
Hi, good morning, and thank you very much for the invitation to share my thoughts on this particular forum. Thank you very much, Luminary, for the opportunity. I think this is something that has not occurred during our lifetime, so especially the COVID-19 as well as the lockdown situation. So what has happened initially was all of us got into the panic mode, right? We were storming supermarkets and trying to grab whatever necessary. And then all what has happened was the lockdown happened, people didn't know what to do. So as my colleague mentioned, as corporates, we have been practicing business continuity plans, BCP, there have been so many risk management plans and things like that. So apparently, this is a good opportunity to test the validity of such plans, whether is it really a compliance requirement or is it just on paper, or you could really execute and implement those. And so that is one thing that took place during the same time. And also, there have been lots of forecasting on the projections on what kind of a recovery. Some people talk about a V-shaped recovery, some say it's going to be U-shaped, some say it's W, and the L-shaped curves are also mentioned, right? But I think we have recovered to a certain extent. If you really look at the best indicator is the stock exchange, how the stock exchange behaved, right? It's already showing a V-shaped recovery. Also, the second aspect is that most of the organization has been talking about digitization, right? How could enable, how could inculcate the digitization practices after the mainstream businesses. However, there's always been this debate on how can we really do that? What are the repercussions? You could not really justify the investment. Also, this has been a good opportunity for the organizations who has invested on the digital infrastructure to demonstrate the ability to even serve their customers, employees, and everybody in this situation. So it's also another thing, actually, those who have invested on technology proactively were able to respond to the changes successfully. And also, again, there has been a discussion to have a work balance. Should we offer work from home? Again, there's always been this when they work from home, how do you really monitor? The situation that there has been no choice but to work from home. So again, that proposition was tested, and some organization has decided to continue with that, whereas some other organizations, got back to the pre-COVID levels. So there has been a debate on that. And again, especially when it comes to the finances, right? Most of the organization, the question when you go to a board meeting and something like that, what's your profit? Nobody has asked what's your cash flow. It has never been an indicator. But again, during the COVID time, there was a new, not a new term apparently, there was a term that has been coined, which is known as cash is king. Cash is king and the rest is, forget about the rest. Now nobody questions so far what is your cash position? What being questioned is when you go to a bank or a financial institution, are you profitable and how much is your profits? Are you growing your profits? Again, the new terminology, people all of a sudden started looking at the cash flow, especially when it comes to organizations. And again, most of the organizations start looking at the P&L or the P&L related parameters only. All of a sudden, people started looking at the assets and the balance sheet and the cash flows. Also, the learning opportunities when it comes. Also, it has revolutionized and also it has changed during this period. Again, earlier, if you really want to learn something, you have to attend a class, learn things physically. Now, apparently, again, things have changed. What we are doing right now is also an outcome, even though you could have this particular forum physically, but you all are continue to doing it digitally, which is also a good engagement tool for people to look at. So these are my 2 cents. So I will continue to speak during the latter part of the session as well. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So coming back, I think we got Sanjeev back strongly connected. So Sanjeev, you're talking about BCP, right? So picking up from what Mahesh said on the organization's perspective and what has happened so far, but what the main concern is in terms of organizational dynamics, people play a huge role, humongous role, right? So what were the best practices and what practices actually made it?
John Wood.
Yeah, are you on mute, Sanjeev? Yeah, I could take a headset.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's lovely. Lovely. Yes, I think that was the problem. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I think, starting with where I left off earlier, in terms of BCP, the first thing was preparedness and making sure that people could work from home. If that was not the case, then nothing really mattered. So as an organization, for example, we were able to get our entire team, 100% of our team, back on track within 24 hours of the lockdown, because everybody had laptops issued, because we are a services company. So it was very easy for us to implement something like that. So it was a good BCP test and we were very successful in getting back on track. And within 24 hours, we had informed everybody, all of our clients, that we are fully operational, and we in fact did not lose a single day of business as a result of the lockdown. So that's the first step, making sure that teams are enabled. Once that's done, our second concern really was productivity. Can people be equally productive? So we started putting in measures rather prematurely, I must add, to make sure that that people are productive. But to our surprise, a pleasant surprise, we found out that people were in fact a lot more productive than they usually are. And there would have been many reasons for it. Obviously, there were less distractions because everything was in lockdown. People were a little bit bored as well because of the same reasons. And also, I think, in times of trouble, people really, rally around organizations and initiatives, and they give in their best. So we saw a tremendous boost in productivity, especially over the first couple of months, where everybody was working not just 8 hours actually, and not just their regular throughput. They were producing a lot more in terms of output. So that was an interesting learning and an interesting outcome that we didn't expect. The fallout of that was that after about a month or two, we started noticing burnout. People were, in fact, now getting into the habit of working 10, 12, sometimes even 14 hours a day. They didn't really care if it was morning or night. People were on their laptops, burning code. So as a result of that, we had to kind of adjust. We forgot about tracking productivity because that was no longer a problem, and we started tracking burnout. We wanted to make sure that people were not over exhausting and getting into trouble. and in fact had to spend a significant amount of effort getting that sorted out. And globally, what we've found since is that this has been a challenge, and not just burnout, but also mental health issues have been on the rise. I think it's gone from single-digit numbers to double-digit numbers, and people are also a lot more open about mental health issues, sleep-related concerns, depression, anxiety, all sorts of things have come into the picture. So making sure that there is a proper support system so that people who need help are provided that help, and making sure that people are working but not really burning themselves out. That was key once that initial enablement challenge was sorted out. So those were the learnings that we personally had from a people perspective. And once we figured those things out, we started performing well and truly at or slightly above our standard productivity levels as an organization.
That's great. Actually, some of the problems you did mention are good problems to have, but I'm sure they would have been definitely challenging for you. So, you see, from what you just said, so what do we actually identify? So, what you said that organizations have to be more sensitive towards issues regarding mental health, regarding working around the clock, because I too had a conversation with someone in the software industry a few days ago, and he also did mention that because everyone's connected, work is seamlessly going on without anyone knowing what time it is, and people also take the liberty of working late in the night because they have structured themselves that way. But some of us also have got to work, yeah. And since getting back to work, so what would be the rules of thumbs for organizations to take forward from this? Okay, from a people perspective, because organizations are driven by people, and they are the greatest asset. So how should an organization henceforth look at managing people? What would be the key aspects for HR division to look at? We could have issues or areas, not issues, but areas concerning, for example, their performance due to their mental health, whatever, so their ability to perform, then this, in terms of training and skills, because even Luminary Learning, we do actually a lot of training, but the situation has changed, and we've come across organizations who have different opinions about how to learn, but we do understand ourselves that learning is part of it, so that in that aspect. So what do you have to say? Mahesh, we can start with you, and then Sanjeev, on what would be the rules of thumbs for organizations to take forward?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the organization should have right policies under the new normal, right? The policies that we had before will not work in this scenario. So that the organization has to change their own policies when it comes to working hours, how do they assess employees, the assessment tools has to be changed, the criteria has to be changed. It's no longer you cannot monitor the face value or the face time, right? It's a more of a traditional way of monitoring employees, right? So you need to start looking at evaluating the employees based on the outcome or the objectives. So even though this has been under the discussion for so many years, but still the organization still do not practice it. So first and foremost, organizations should develop right policies and for them to write HR policies to deal with these kind of matters. And secondly, the skills development. Again, you need to have a different skill set to operate under this scenario, especially when it comes to sales. So, there are some organizations still that are on the lockdown stage with a limited number of people attending the office. So, especially when it comes to sales, the sales people should be skilled to deal with the customers virtually. And so this is a different skill set, and you will not be able to meet people face to face. So this kind of skills enhancement has to be done. Again, when it comes to training, we have been always doing the training related to the job related things. But again, we also start educating employees on other things like personal financial management, how do they manage their time, how do they manage their lifestyle and things like that. Because one thing that we have realized during the lockdown is that it is not the cost of living. It is the cost of lifestyle that is driving the costs and the time. So I think organization has to have the training as well as HR policies around these matters. At the same time, the technically or digitally, the organization should start investing on the digital infrastructure, because it will save you, it will give you a lot of efficiency that you have never thought of before. And so that's my point of view on that.
Yeah, Sanjeev, would you like to take that on in terms of what to take, and also where Mahesh left off? I think he pointed out to something very important that I figured out from what you're saying, is that there's also an issue of team dynamics, because you're virtually engaging your employees and they're sitting at home. So we don't meet, and we are a kind of culture, Sri Lankans are the kind of culture that we need people's energy to, live, actually. So meeting up, the camaraderie at work, the machang, all that, just this sure thing. But now that's missing to some extent in some organizations. I know of some organizations that still haven't opened their doors. They're very limited in operation. How does this work?
Yeah, so first of all, I agree with what Mahesh said, and let me start by addressing your last point, Ashik. So when it comes to that social aspect of things, one thing that we did that proved to be quite effective was to have virtual gatherings every Friday night whenever we could. So we in fact had beer parties Friday nights. People had their own beer at home or whatever else drinks that they wanted. But we all got together on a video conference like this, and had a good time, and that was almost as good as meeting face to face, right? I mean, at some point you forget that you're meeting virtually. So we did a few virtual social events that kind of mitigated some of these challenges. At the same time, going back to the original question of the new normal and what should organizations do to adjust. So what we found was that once we started coming back to work, obviously there was a time when everything was being done remotely, and then suddenly people started getting a little tired of it. So in fact, we were probably one of the organizations that were last to open up in terms of our physical offices. And the only reason we did that was because people were getting tired of it, working from home. So we opened up. We didn't make a big announcement, but people started trickling in. And now I think about 30 to 50% of our workforce turn up at office on any given day. There is a certain logic applied for which teams come in, etc., depending on the need. But the important point here is that we realize that not everybody needs to be in office every day, and that is really the new normal for us. Seriously, in a services business, or even in a manufacturing environment, there are many people who are not involved in physical activity, and we need to now ask ourselves, do we really need to be in office to do the job? And I feel that if you're not involved in physical activity, a good 95 to 99% of people can work remotely. And then the question is how often, for how long, etc. So we've kind of settled to a 30 to 60% kind of range. We're starting with about a 30% range. We had 3 offices here in Colombo. We permanently shut down one. So we're working on the roster. It's a cost saving as well.
Wow.
So we are on a roster. We do now maintain social distancing because only 30% of the people show up to work. So better health practices as well. So this is really the new normal. I think remote working has now got to be given some serious consideration, and to Mahesh's point, it does help with finances as well, and it also perhaps improves quality of life for a lot of our employees. I mean, as far as work is concerned, we've already proven that in our business, at least, and I'm sure in many services businesses, and it's not going to be a problem. So why not? So gearing up for that and making sure that all the collaboration tools are in place, having the infrastructure and the internet connectivity is no longer a problem with 4G and 5G. Having proper internet security set up, all of that, those things that are related to that BCP topic we discussed earlier, that's important to be able to do this consistently and for a long time. But if you've got that set up, there's nothing stopping you from continuing to have at least a good mix of remote working.
So what both of you just mentioned, and many ideas floating into the mind. I'm sure those listening in would also have ideas coming in of how they should actually be looking at people and bringing them to work, but actually making the hour that they spend on work is 100% or at least 90% of productive actual work. Okay, so that's very interesting. And the area you all both mentioned, I think, is about people, their mental health and their wellness and their physical health and so on and so forth. Actually, that you have a very healthy force with a healthy body, healthy mind. You're also looking at reducing the space you work, which is not people related, but actually asset and rather finance related, but it all adds up. So thank you for that. So see, that's inside the organization. So I'd like to now direct the conversation towards what's outside the organization. So during the pandemic, I'm sure many people, or I mean the finance departments and the board would have been talking about business relationships that are external. Okay, so now what happens between us and our suppliers, us and our clients, us and those business partners who actually deliver the final product that we offer in our businesses. So the question is that, so how were they shaped when things went bad? And what actually should we be doing? Should business arrangements, partnerships be changed, the way we operate actually? Okay, what should we do now, and what do you think would last? Sanjeev, we'll start off with you.
Sure. So I think there were again sea changes in how business relationships are perceived and deployed. So first of all, in terms of the supply chain, I think organizations realize that you need to have a resilient supply chain that does not break down at the simplest challenge. So people are now making sure that they go into depth to make sure that their suppliers in particular are able to withstand such challenges. So resilience is key for any organization that is supplying to another organization. So that's going to be important to keep in mind. But also in terms of partnerships, there are many different types of stakeholders. So if you do a bit of a stakeholder analysis, what you realize is that the expectations from a company has changed significantly. And Gartner has done a lot of research around this, and they've come out with the fact that the primary driver for an organization, or the primary expectation from an organization, has changed from shareholder value to social value. Things like safety and well-being, like you discussed, business agility. How can you respond to things change and not be stuck with the traditional ways of doing things? Employee satisfaction. And then two other key things. One is environment has become a big issue, because what if this pandemic taught us anything, it is the importance of the environment. The United Nations has been driving the environment issue. The World Health Organization has been driving the issue. EU just yesterday, I believe, declared that the two key priorities for them are the environment and digitization. So those two things are, in fact, now the new priorities for many organizations in the EU and even in the US. In fact, if you look at the US, you'd realize that although the White House has walked away from a lot of these environmental initiatives like the Paris Accord, people like Michael Bloomberg, Matt Damon, and multiple governors in the United States have got together and still implemented those environmental objectives for the Paris Accord. And that's largely because of the realization that this is key. And then the other part is the digitization part. Again, related to business relationships. What many organizations have realized is that it's not just sufficient to have only one part of the organization fully digitized. For example, if you're, let's say, a grocery store, right, and you have a great supply chain integration, most companies would have been happy until the 16th of March of this year, but no longer so, because just having good supply chain means you can get your stocks into your stores, but not to the hands of the consumers. So having an end-to-end, supply chain digitization and reliance and resilience and agility across the entire supply chain through digitization has become the new priority in terms of business relationships.
Yeah, good, because I think you actually touched on a topic that actually is a question coming somewhere down the line. So we'll come back to that, Sanjeev. Thank you for that. Right. So you opened the door to that conversation. Mahesh, what are your thoughts, and how do the business relationships actually sustain after this? Because what Sanjeev mentioned was the fact that now people should be looking at the whole thing, the whole line of the supply chain. Reliability is now a big concern. Is it cost no more? Because the way we've been thinking, and Sri Lankans, we've always looked at credit or cost, or and things like that. So what is your take on this entire thing?
Yeah, I think this also has given us a good opportunity for us to look at our supply chain, how resilient they are, especially if you really look at, I'm coming from a manufacturing and related to industries, especially the supply chain has been China-centric, right? So the first thing that has happened is China was the first country that got impacted. And the moment something goes wrong in China, you are in trouble. So people started looking at, we need to diversify the supply chain. Now there are two, the next best alternative is India, and India is also in trouble. Right? So the two main supply chains, especially for global businesses, so China and India, both got impacted by this pandemic. So it is high time people started diversifying the sourcing base. That is number one. Probably the countries like even Sri Lanka will have opportunity to engage in the global supply chain. So that's a new business opportunity that we will get out of this particular pandemic. So probably the Chinese as well as Indian companies might start their subsidiaries in countries like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Cambodia, so that their customers are not getting impacted. So that's the positive side of it. So if we are really prepared and if we have the right policies, so there is an huge opportunity for Sri Lanka to get ourselves linked to the global supply chain. So that is one side of the story. Again, also this has been proven that the centralization and the decentralization. So those who have been having centralized supply chain, especially supply chain which is centralized around Colombo, because what has happened was half of the part of the country was operational by 20th April, whereas the western province was continued to keep under lockdown until mid. So the organization that have been had been having decentralized operations was able to successfully execute the operation without much difficulties to the rest of the country. So again, we have tested the question mark on the centralization of the decentralization. As my colleague mentioned, the digitization really matters, and also, we don't have to go that far, right? We always have been, going for shopping for supermarkets, and immediately during the lockdown, the grocery shop in our lane is one who provided the supplies for us. Again, it's also, we have been able to test certain brands that we have never tested in our life. Simply those brands are not available in the supermarket, and sometimes they're actually in better quality. Sometimes, because we didn't get an opportunity to test those brands because these are not available in the supermarket. So again, I have switched to certain brands due to the opportunity that I got to test certain brands. So these are some of the things that I have noticed during the lockdown.
Amazing, thank you. A lot of ideas from that. So I'm sure Sri Lanka is one, but also Sri Lanka in terms of sourcing, amazing opportunity. And also for us to look at a alternate supply sourcing network for ourselves, also to be part of a chain is also going to be very important. And I truly understand what you say mean by centralized and decentralized operation, and the ability to decide and move fast is going to be very important. Amazing. So I just want to move on to the other side of things now. Everyone tighten their belts. I'm talking about finance, right? There's some still do, and out of necessity, right? So how do we look at financial planning and cash flow management? Sanjeev, you touched on that, I think, or one of you touched on this matter of cash flow management, right? In the future, how do we do that? Well, what is going to be cash is king, yes, but how do we look at it? Were there any learnings that can be shared, both of you? Any models that can be adopted on basically of how do we start looking at tightening the belt? Do we do it in all aspects, or is there one particular area that we have to look at? You did touch on the fact that increasing productivity while not spending on area or space, office space is one area, yes. So how would you look at it in terms of tightening of belts?
Can I come in?
Yes, please. Sorry,
Yeah.
yes.
So I think, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the question has been the profitability. Everybody has been questioning the profitability, and the profitability has been the metrics to assess the business performance. Right, prior to the lockdown, if you walk into a bank and if you go to a board meeting, the first question that gets asked is, what's your profitability, and are you profitable, and are you growing your profitability? There was a less emphasis has been given on the cash flow, and sometimes you don't even look at the cash flow statement, right, in the organization context. However, during the situation, people start realizing that no point of having profits, but we got to have cash in hand. So the cash flow management has given a lot of emphasis. So something that has happened, I'm sure most of the organizations are following, is that, so basically when it comes to cash flow management, there are three variables to manage. So I'm coming from a finance background, so I might go a little in depth into this, because there are three variables to manage. That's your collections, that is receivables, and your inventory position, as well as the payments. So people started to realize that their inventory, they kept more than what is necessary. So they have over invested on inventory. Because inventory is an area that people hardly give any thoughts on. So that an area to look at, and people started looking at the inventory, started rationalizing it, and they realized that, look, we don't have to have this much of inventory, because inventory drives lots of other costs. For example, when you have a large amount of inventory, you need to have a large amount of space to store, then it increases your rent expenses, then you got to insure it, then it also drives up so it drives so many other costs. You need to have security in place, you need to have the air conditioning in place, then there's a risk of expiry. All this comes into an equation. So first, people started looking at the inventory and the inventory management practices. The second one is that the collections. So the collection has been left either to the sales department or the finance department, but some organizations, they had started getting into weekly reviews where even the top management get involved. So when these things happen, things gets improved, and all of a sudden people realize, why didn't we do it before? We could have done the same even pre-pandemic. Right? Second, when it comes to third one, is the payments. Payment, which is the cash going out again. A weekly review, or a clear review on what's going to happen in the next week will always give you sanity, and the top management involvement into these areas, even though this has been left to mainly the finance and operations. But the involvement of the top management also really give you lots of results, especially when it comes to cash flow management. Second point of view, there's a tendency, right? During the good times, you tend to accumulate assets, which are not really giving you any return, and all of a sudden you have a large balance sheet, but compared to the assets that you have, it doesn't generate enough return. So people started realizing, do we really need this kind of assets? Can we get rid of this? Can we convert them into cash? So that can we go on asset light model? Should you really own? Do we really need to own a fleet of vehicles? So can I have half of my vehicle fleet on and the balance are on rent basis? so that I'm getting the flexibility. So these kind of discussions has never taken place before. Even those discussions has been initiated by the finance department, usually be shut down because there's no real need. So I think the the organizations started looking at the business operating model in a completely different point of view. So basically, people are thinking about a leaner and meaner business models, and as my colleague mentioned, so you're shutting down certain offices, and all of a sudden you realize you don't really need this much of space, right? So likewise, people started looking at the balance sheets and the liabilities and trying to get rid of what is not necessary. So these are the outcomes that I've seen during the pandemic. Probably there are some good practices that you can continue to do so in the future. Thank you.
Great, great. Like you said, Mahesh, the pandemic has actually woken up a lot of us, many of us, and we actually have started looking at things that we've not been able to see and unlock certain hidden potential of even the assets. Like we'll come to that in the business modeling side of things, to really unlock the potential of some of the things we actually hold as assets. So Sanjeev, how would you weigh on in this aspect in terms of tightening belts? So what should we not tighten belts also is a question that needs answering.
Yeah, let me answer that in a slightly different way, Ashik. So first of all, I has brought up this point about assets. I think we need to expand that to all overheads in general, right? What we've come on, what many organizations have come to the realization is that a lot of overheads don't have to be fixed overheads anymore. You can outsource entire business processes that you never dreamed of outsourcing. I mean, I heard that you guys are now taking on the entire T&D department as an outsourcing, service. So that's something perhaps nobody thought about for generations, right? And it's not just T&D. There are so many parts of the life cycle of a business, or the value chain of a business that are being outsourced. So minimizing your overheads in your financial statements has come into a completely new light now. So just from that point of view, but in terms of what you should not tighten belts on, obviously, I think the people aspect comes into the picture immediately the moment you ask that question. A lot of organizations, unfortunately, are faced with that question, when it comes to maintaining profitability and cash flows, as Mahesh mentioned. Sometimes, unfortunately, you have no choice but to look at reducing costs from a people perspective, salaries and other benefits. We as an organization firmly believe that that is the absolute last thing that we will do, and we must do, because people are our real only assets, especially in this new operating environment. And if you sell them out first, that's the beginning or the end as far as we are concerned. So making sure that the people are still looked after, the salaries are paid, the development, their promotions, their training, all of that is still looked after in spite of tightening budgets, is very important to us, and I think to many organizations. Now, it's a difficult decision to make when cash flows are tight and profits are low, but if you are a people-centric organization and your value is driven primarily through your people, your employees, then looking after them first is of paramount importance.
So, yeah, were you saying something?
Sorry, I just wanted to add, the other thing that is important to remember is that it is no longer possible to sit back and wait for things to be all right. In the past, when something goes wrong, it's been a case of many organizations or even countries thinking, hey, you know what, we can just sit back and wait until this passes. But with this pandemic has taught us that especially when it comes to finance matters, you cannot sit back and watch. That'll be a disaster. So being proactive and being agile as an organization, being able to adapt to the changes is very important. And I'll give you a quick example. We've been a services organization ever since our inception, but in March, we made a decision to go to market with a specific few products that we felt were emerging unmet needs within our space, but things that we can respond to. So we split our organization into two, and we created a new ventures organization that focused on products. And we built a few products and took them to market within a few weeks. For example, we built a product called Dynamedics, which is used by, and Teleclinic, which are used by healthcare organizations around the world, as well as other large corporates, to assure the well-being of either the people they serve or the employees of their organization. So that was an unmet need, and we'd never done products before. Since then, we've done 5 products in the last 6 months. So that is business agility. And if you have to be financially strong, you need to be not so stuck in traditions and be willing and able to adjust to the environmental challenges and respond quickly. And I think a lot of organizations are learning that during the pandemic.
That's true. So one thing that we didn't touch on in tightening belts, because we need to quickly answer this and then move on to the modeling side of the business. So see, markets are getting fragmented, and Mahesh himself mentioned that he discovered new brands that never existed because of the pandemic. But digitization and so many opportunities being presenting themselves is actually making it more fragmented. So how should organizations look at clients? Because maintaining and keeping your clients captivated and them coming to you again and again is more important right now. So organizations in that respect would have to then invest in keeping clients with them. So has this importance increased? Do organizations have to look at it differently? Mahesh?
Yes, I think the organization needs to really invest on the customer management, CRM, and especially the digital infrastructure to deal with the customer, right? Even though we have been, dealing with the customer, some organizations don't have a way of reaching them and communicating them. So the customer experience management has been overlooked to a certain extent because we could deal with them physically most of the time. But by introducing on the right tools, the customer experience tools, and by providing the right training to the frontline employees, I believe the organizations will be able to overcome these challenges.
Good. Sanjeev, do you have any weighing in on this?
Yeah, just to kind of echo Mahesh's points, I think customer centricity has become so key, because that's now the only face of the organization, right? At least during the pandemic. And also being able to take your business to the customer. And we can talk about this more when we talk about business models. But no longer having to let the customer come to you because that is the new normal now. So being able to take your business to the customer is key in this whole context.
Good. So let's move on to the business model. I think it's a long-awaited thing. So let me ask this: has the pandemic changed the way we model our businesses? Okay. Is there a shift? I think you touched on it, Mahesh, quite rightly. Is there a shift? Definitely, yes. I think you're going to nail this. To be asset light. Okay. What does it mean as a business and as individuals, right? How do we do that? And invariably, then what happens is there will be a need to pass the ownership of these then assets, if you want to be asset light, to investors and banks. So we need an alternate support system that's going to help organizations such as ours to then be asset light. Okay, so you need structures to do that. So I'd like to know what you have to say about that, and then we move on to the other side of modeling. So Mahesh, would you like to touch on that first?
Yes, I think the asset light business model has been in the discussion for so long, but organizations again have been a little bit reluctant to implement it, right? Because you have the security of the feeling of the security when you own something, and so that's one of the reasons why most of the organizations are investing, sometimes not on their core business. For example, the organization those who are running on a retail business, do you really invest on their own shops? do they really invest on their own fleet is a question mark. You can simply buy things on rent. You can operate on that particular model, which has always been a question mark, but nobody has thought of discovered. Nobody challenged this particular business model. But when the pandemic happens, when your cash flows are in trouble as well as your profitability is under threat, people start looking at it. Do you really have to own everything? So that is from the business point of view. And most of the organizations are now really looking at the ownership versus the outsourcing. So that discussion is taking place right now. Secondly, I would also like to bring a different point of view. Like to extend the definition of assets, because even though we are talking about the hard assets that is there in our balance sheet, we spoke about the human resource, that asset. Are we really making use the full potential of our human resource is a question mark. Especially if you are in the manufacturing environment, you don't even allow a slight inefficiency. There are work study officers who are operating in the operational flow, who study the every slightest moment of the employees, and they make arrangements. They basically modify the flow in a way that the inefficiencies are curtailed. The question is, are we doing it in our office environment? Are we doing it in the service industry? Because even though we apply these work study practices and the efficient practices and productivity practices on the manufacturing flow, we have not looked at what our office workers are doing. If you really look at, there are graduates who are doing repetitive and mundane tasks. So simply there are people doing, enter into Excel, download something to Excel sheet, and again upload into Excel sheet. Those who are doing reconciliations, right? Those who are doing the checking and the correction and things like that. So these functions has got to be automated so that you will not chase the employees out, but you can get a better outcome from those employees. I think this aspect also has to come in. Are we really making use of the full potential of our employees? Because most of the time, the entry requirement for a organization at the executive cadre is to become a graduate. And are we really make use of the full potential of graduate is a question mark. When they come on board, the type of tasks they are doing, are they really adding value to the organization? That's the area to look at, because the moment you get the technology to do some of these repetitive and mundane tasks, you will be able to get much better output from your own employees, so that it will drive the profitability and the cash flow of the organization. So this is an area that we need to think about. There will be technology. I'm sure Sanjeev will be able to facilitate on the technology side of it, but there are a lot of improvement that can be done on the technology side. So that's my take on that.
I think you just took the words out of my mouth. I was just waiting to say the very words. Sanjeev, good idea for you. I think opportunity just presented itself, so I think you guys can meet up afterwards. But first answer the question. How do you look at it? Because we have a few minutes to go. There's one more area that I'd like to discuss. So how would you look at it? I agree, assets, physical assets, and you have people as assets, and you have processes that you've invested. So, your software system itself is an asset. Yeah. So and you've invested in it. And is it best to give it up? There are things like that. You could do. So yeah. What's your take on it?
Yeah.
And
like I said earlier, I think a lot of overheads.
Is there then an opportunity for?
Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So is there then an opportunity of this ownership of these assets to shift? Mahesh, from finance perspective, you'll be able to also weigh in at some point, but the ownership has to shift somewhere. So then there's supportive systems have to then evolve.
Yeah, absolutely, Ashik. I think this is what I referred to when I meant that a lot of overheads can be converted. So the way you convert overheads is by moving those assets to your supply chain, right? So it's no longer your primary value chain, but your secondary value chain can also be outsourced. Everything from T&D to your janitorial services to you name it, right? Whatever is not core to your business that you don't want competitor knowledge of, you can outsource. So that I think that's the key part there.
Yeah. So okay, this question has been bugging me for some time, and I'd really like you guys to shed some light on it. Okay. Has the outlook on product and service development changed? Okay, from being centered around what you offer in terms of products and services to how it complements a large ecosystem. And Sanjeev, you touched on this a little bit before, right? A large ecosystem of value delivery. So thinking that you are not merely providing a product or service, but you're actually part of a large chain of delivering value to the end consumer. Meaning we look at building ecosystems instead of focusing on the industry or offering. So do you get my point? So Mahesh, what do you have to say about this?
Certainly, yes. I think we need to build the ecosystems, right? For example, you don't really have to own everything, right? Coming back to the value chain, you need to have an ecosystem where everybody could participate, and you should develop a platform that everybody could participate and provide the solution to the consumer efficiently. So I think that's the talk of the town these days, for example. Then obviously we come to the point of that, part of the thing will be shared. Part of the resources will be shared, and part of the resources can be outsourced completely. Yes.
Sanjeev?
Yeah, just to add to that, I think the other question that people are now asking more and more is, do we really need certain things? For example, brick and mortar storefront was a no-brainer for most industries up until March. But Amazon pioneered this several years ago with their online bookstore. But since then, there has been an explosion of things going virtual and digital and online. And you're really asking the question: do you really need a brick and mortar storefront? Just as an example, I mean, that leads to a whole different conversations of the entire business model itself changing, and more towards taking your business to the consumer. The consumer centricity side of it is now paramount, I think, moving forward. So when you talk about that ecosystem, I think the focus of the ecosystem shifted from production and supply to consumer. How do you take your product or service to the consumer in the best possible way, in the most efficient way? How do you rebrand yourself? How do you reposition yourself physically, virtually, all of that? So I think that's a slightly different conversation about business modeling, but relevant nevertheless.
So all of that, I think, is the final. I think we've reached the end of our session. So just wanted to make a comment on the fact that yes, it is also that, but also possibly, it is also to make sure that your business is more sustainable and more resilient in the face of change, and it will also be useful if you could see whether you could stretch yourself through this ecosystem in value delivery. And I think that's where margins are. That's where value creation lies. So that's also something that I think would be useful to start looking at. Yeah, you have anything to say with that? And with the last final round of comments from you two, we'd like to wrap things up. So Mahesh, over to you.
Yes, I think we are heading towards a good recovery, faster than what we thought of, and it's important for us to sustain this. Again, the best example is to look at, I would like to call this particular example, how the stock exchange has moved. Right? So on 13th, when it was open on, after 7 days, it was open on May 13th, if I'm not mistaken. It was lasted, it crashed during the 10 seconds. Right? During 10 seconds, it crashed. And yesterday, we are almost at the pre-COVID level. So that's the kind of a recovery people have seen. So you see two types of people. On May 13th, people thought, okay, this is the end of the war. We should get rid of our investment and go out. And people did that. Stock market crashed. And there's another set of people who thought, look, there's a one of a lifetime opportunity for us to getting into the market. So they kept on buying that. What you see in the market is the equilibrium. And by yesterday, we have almost come to the pre-COVID level. So that's a very good indication of, that's one of the early indications that we can, see how things have recovered. So it's a more V-shaped curve.
Lovely. Sanjeev, last.
Yeah, I would like to, I think, cap this up by focusing on that consumer centricity a little bit. Because over the last 6 months, I've come across so many initiatives to try and bring the products and services to the end consumers and meet and fulfill the unmet demands. One example is the telemedicine side that I briefly talked about earlier, but there are also so many other things. For example, you see car washers being taken to people's homes. You see this concept of a recipe in a box where, recipes are sent, all the ingredients for a recipe is sent to the house so that the family can get together and, prepare a meal. You also have another variant of, home food delivery where you actually can book a chef online. These are things that were completely unheard of, right? And another growing trend of kids, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds being taught online. Who would have thought that this was possible? But hey, guess what? Today all of this is possible, and all you need is a mindset change towards understanding who the consumer is and what we as an organization must do to provide to the needs of the consumer. So that's, for me, the biggest learning that COVID-19 has brought to the table.
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, we are ending on a positive note. So like you say, it's positive for those who are willing to take the challenge, I believe, and who are willing to open their minds to what both of you just mentioned. So thank you for this. It's been an amazing experience. Thank you so much for all the knowledge that you have shared so far. Thank you so much. We had Sanjeev Paliyavarana, the Chief Operating Officer of Mitra Digital Service at Mitra Innovation. And thanks to Mahesh Amrasiri as well, General Manager, Corporate Planning and Business Development at BSI Samsung, Sri Lanka. Thank you, gentlemen. It's been wonderful having this conversation. I'd like to hand over the session to Anton. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ashik.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashik. Sadly, all good things must come to an end, and in what seems like a blink of an eye, an hour has passed us by. Thank you everyone who joined in and stayed locked on. Thank you Sanjeev and Mahesh for your insight beyond par. Ashik for facilitating this conversation. The coronavirus pandemic brought unprecedented levels of personal and professional upheaval upon employees as well as employers. One thing is for sure, that it has irrevocably transformed aspects of life and professional life as we know it. And yet, today we continue with our march forward, accepting, as we heard, the fundamental changes to work routines, looking at managing costs, the newfound disciplines, the liberties of work from home, the organizational cultures fortified afresh, and redesigning the future of work. These are all indeed unequal changes, which is perhaps what has eluded us when we say new normal. A note of caution though, a lesson is repeated until it is learned. So let it not be that these lessons or these learnings, these adaptations are forgotten and laid to waste. Emerging mostly unfazed from a pandemic is a historical feat. At the risk of sounding presumptuous perhaps, this is not the moment to sit back and rest on the laurels of success. It is a time, as we rightly heard today, to push towards the next rung in that upward climb with the aim to thrive. Leaving you with these thoughts, we also take a moment to quickly thank H1 for being our technology partner for the 3 seasons running. Coming up in the next hour is This, That and the Other, Season 2 with Varun. Do join in. They are discussing the good, the bad and the ugly of the usual, and today is no exception, as they dissect the pursuit of happiness, a fool's dream or a possibility. Enjoy the rest of the day. Stay safe, stay productive.
Thank you.